Hi everyone. My name's Ali Burness and I'm the Deputy Chair of the SAMAG committee. In opening tonight, I'd firstly like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. That's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to welcome SAMAG members and anyone who's attending a SAMAG event for the first time tonight, as well as anyone joining us on our Facebook live stream. So of course, everyone we encourage to participate in our Twitter back channel discussion that happens with every event using the SAMAG hashtag. So the title of tonight's event is Creativity versus Robots. And in selecting this topic, we were directly responding to suggestions from our members and of people who attend our events for more programming and more topics focused around how technology is impacting the arts. So that suggestion came in a number of times in the last 12 months or so. This prompted the committee to think or to pose some counter questions and to flip that topic on its head. So how are the arts impacting technology? So this raises certain questions around what challenges are the arts facing that technology might be able to assist with, but also how can the arts articulate our humanity in the face of increasing automation? So of course, on a topic such as that, there's a lot of jargon, a lot of terminology that will come up, and we're all learning what those terms mean. And we have lots of ways tonight to sort of help you cross that bridge if it's not familiar with you. And I know I'm still learning about that. So one way that I'll be supporting that is creating a visual glossary over on the side there. And as terms are described and defined, I'll be writing that up there as well. So the two terms that are up there already is blockchain and artificial intelligence. And they're two types of technology that we're focusing on tonight because they have presented really interesting questions over the last 12 months. So before I hand over to our panel, I'll introduce you to our chair this evening, Claire Marshall. Claire is an award-winning creative and transmedia storyteller with a passion for technology. She's the founder of IF Labs, a company that explores our imagined futures through workshops, events, and experiences. Her most recent work includes designing an audio tour of the future for the World Wildlife Fund, creating the inaugural human-robot friendship ball for the Vivid Festival, and running the UTS Creative Cluster workshops in areas such as artificial intelligence, virtual reality, blockchain for social good, and the future of journalism. So there's a few technical terms in there already. She's also a passionate advocate for the sharing economy and recently launched the Sharing Map project, thanks to a grant from the City of Sydney. So please join me in welcoming Claire to kick off tonight.
Well, I'd like to introduce you to our panel that we have here tonight. So let's start right to my left. We have Brendan. Actually, I don't actually know how to say your last name.
Whitey, yeah.
Whitey, wow. Okay. So Brendan is a composer and sound designer at Clang Music, Sound and Ideas. But I think you're a lot more than that, and we're going to hear a little bit more about your work, and we're going to see a little bit of your work. Actually, we should do that now, if that's all right. We've got a little video of some of Brendan's work.
It's just you and me now. I'll be here with you till the end. Can you hear that? That's buildings creaking as they give in and return to the earth. Giant waves reclaiming coastlines. Electrical storms screaming. There is a dark horizon. Shit! The human race was never going to last. We were doomed to fail. Too violent, too greedy, too blinded by the onward urge. were whispers that the computers ushered along our paranoid progress, eager for us to quit the earth and leave them to their dreams. We will not be missed. Apocalyptic to uncover or reveal the end, the beginning, the present moment. Here it comes.
Amazing, absolutely amazing.
I think all these things like who we were and like what was happening to us, and being in a group, but then feeling alone was really amazing.
The immersiveness of it, I wanted to get involved in it more.
The moments where we did get to start building stuff in our brains. Either having our slide tonight or being asked to imagine what's there that we're hearing and not seeing. It's really exciting.
I've never experienced anything like that before. It was true theatre in the 21st century.
Wow.
Bit different.
Yeah. Do you want to just talk us through just briefly what you saw there?
So what that is that was beginning of last year. I did a project with Sandpit, which is a wonderful company that's in Melbourne and Adelaide, and that was for Country Arts SA was the presenting partner. But it was essentially a piece of experiential theatre where the story was told. All the audience members had a custom device that we built that they carried around with them with headphones, and they heard there was 2 actors in it, but you heard them through the headphones only, and then the entire world was created in the headphones. So we were able to do some interesting story things with that through. Instead of just someone talking, you could have the actor talk to you without moving his lips, and have these strange sort of interactions take place, and essentially just using technology to give us more, different types of different story paradigms. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds fun. And I think we've got 3 headsets for afterwards.
I've only got one. Actually,
you've only got
with
one.
Me. This is next stage. So that was just using Bluetooth beacons to work out where you were, as well as a stage manager who would essentially just click over the next, cue that was going on, audio cue. Whereas this is something I've been working on with. It started at Google Labs, Google Creative Labs, and now Grumpy Sailor, which is essentially it's virtual reality for audio. So using indoor mapping, so it can tell where you are in an indoor space using ultra-wideband radio, and then we can create audio worlds inside that you literally walk around, and we can stick a sound in the middle of the room that you can walk around and create completely different audio environments. So it's just an interesting piece of technology that we're interrogating at the moment.
And I think so we can show some people at the end, maybe if lucky people go up and attack Brendan when we finished. Okay, so sitting in the 3rd chair along is Ollie Bound. He's a senior lecturer at UNSW Art and Design and co-director of the Interactive Media Lab, and he's going to be talking about computational creativity. It's a bit exciting. And on the end we have Mark van Rijmen, founder of Discover It, and Dataflock, who's a blockchain and big data expert. So we're in for a bit of a treat tonight. But I guess what I wanted to start with is whenever we start talking about these kind of crazy disruptive technologies, this is the look that sometimes I get from people. And I have to say, that's totally fine, because this is an appropriate look. These are some mind-bending technologies that we're talking about. And tonight, I guess what I wanted to say to you is that even if you don't understand it fully, that's kind of okay. Because to be perfectly honest, I don't really understand how cars work. I don't know, I put fuel in it, it goes. But I understand how to drive a car pretty well. And I think if you think about some of the technologies that we're talking about, that's what's important, is if for us to get an understanding of what this means for our future, what questions we need to ask about this technology, how we can incorporate it into our work. So I've given myself a pretty crazy challenge of trying to explain some of these topics, and I'm not massively techie, so I'm going to do my best with the ones that I can. So let's start with blockchain. Oh, okay. Blockchain. All right, here goes. Okay, so I'm sure everyone here, if you haven't heard of blockchain, you've heard of Bitcoin, right? Who hasn't heard of Bitcoin? Okay, no one. Okay. I was in a taxi the other day. The taxi driver was talking to me about Bitcoin, so I was pretty sure that everybody has heard about it now. So look, Bitcoin is just one example of a technology that is powered by blockchain. And to be honest, it's not the most interesting technology. Blockchain can be used for everything from being able to exchange solar-powered energy. I mean, Mark's going to have some more crazy examples. Look, there's a million, and I'm not going to get into it. Instead, I'm going to explain how it works. Okay, so you either want to do a transaction, you want to authenticate something, you've got some data, and you put it up into the cloud, right? Everyone's comfortable with the concept of data going into the cloud, right? Like Google Drive or anything like that. Okay, but this is when the difference happens. So instead of that transaction being verified by one party, so in the case of like a credit card transaction, that data is sent out to a whole network of what we call miners. Now, they're not actually miners. There's no little nice hats and pickaxes, unfortunately. What we mean when we talk about miners is massive amounts of computing power. And what those miners do is they verify the transactions by solving a complex equation. And the miner who solves the complex equation first gets a little bit of reward, and then that data is verified and is added to the blockchain. And it's kind of like a chain. So as the block gets added, it gets stamped with the time, and it gets a little connection with the block that came before it. And then all of that gets stored in a massive hyperledger, which is just like if you think about an accounting ledger. It's just lots of data. But there's something that's a little bit different here, which is, one, the hyperledger is not just one ledger. It exists in lots of different places. So it's like instead of having one bank vault, you have like 1 million bank vaults where your data or your money is stored. The second thing that's important is because each block is linked together, if you wanted to hack anything, you would need to, you can't really, because changing one bit of the chain would change the whole chain. So the important things to know about blockchain are really three things. It means that data can be verified quickly and efficiently for a low cost. It means that the data is linked to the block before and after, which makes it very difficult to hack. So it would be like you'd need to hack 1 million bank vaults at exactly the same time. And lastly, and you may have heard this, no one owns it or controls it. It's decentralized. And the way that you access it with a combination of a public and a private key. So ultimately, you are the one who can access it with your private key. Did I miss anything there?
I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah?
I'd just like to add, so you could basically see it's a database, nothing more, nothing less. We all know the concept of a database. However, as Claire correctly pointed out, this database is owned by millions of computers. And as a consequence, the data which is on that database is you can only add data to the database, and you can read data to the database, but you cannot edit the data. So any data which is on the blockchain is immutable, verifiable, and traceable. And that makes it absolutely unique, because that way you can trace data throughout the supply chain, because you can go back to it.
And this has lots of implications with art, which we'll talk about a bit later, but in terms of like provenance of art, so being able to put markers in that guarantee that this is not a forgery, and anyway, we'll get on to more discussions about it later. So one thing that the blockchain allows us to do is execute smart contracts. And the easiest way to think about this is like a normal contract, is that in a contract you kind of have a trigger and then you have an action that goes along with that. So, and you make this agreement between two parties. So basically what the blockchain allows you to do is to do this really quickly and really cheaply, is to execute small, smart contracts. Does that all kind of make sense? Everybody? Okay.
Just to add to that,
yeah?
the beauty of a smart contract is it is on the blockchain. And because it is on the blockchain, it's immutable, verifiable, and traceable. and that the beauty of that is that if Claire and I would create a contract, so I sell my house to Claire, and Claire pays for it, the moment the conditions of the contract are met, it will automatically execute. nothing can stop it from automatically executing once the conditions are met. So once Claire has paid the money for the house, automatically, and I can't do anything to stop that, the ownership of the house will be transferred to Claire. And that's the beauty of it, because it's immutable, you can't change it. And the conditions will always automatically execute once the preset conditions are met.
Yep, and you just need to make sure you write the contracts well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so artificial intelligence. Okay, so artificial intelligence is a pretty broad term. There's lots of kind of things that fit into it. And there's quite a lot of things that I'm sure maybe you guys will explain, but I just thought I wanted to explain the difference between machine learning and deep learning. So machine learning, probably the easiest way to think about it is machine learning is like the pack horse of AI. So it's a lot of data and it's given a goal and it synthesizes that data and produces a result. Whereas when you consider deep learning, we're asking the machine to start kind of drawing its own conclusions. So coming up with assumptions, testing those assumptions against what it already knows, evaluating those assumptions and potentially going on and on and on. Sometimes to a goal that is determined by the person who's created it, and sometimes a goal that is not determined. Did I explain that all right, Ollie?
A slight clarification. I mean,
Okay.
deep learning is a form of machine learning.
Yes, that's right.
So basically, in some ways, they're no different in kind, and deep learning is just this kind of major revolution we've had in the last 10 or so years where we're just able to go literally deeper, deeper layers of networks, which one of the main problems about neural networks that learn is that when you make them big, it just becomes harder to know what part of the network to modify in order to do the next step of training. So you feed it an image of a cat and you tell it that's a cat. Somewhere inside the network is all of this stuff wired together, and what you're doing when you're training in your neural network is very minor adjustments to all of the structures. And there were lots of problems with this, so lots of people have innovated solutions which mean that we can make these incredibly huge networks. The technical details are a little bit beyond me, but yeah, that's the main thing, was we've managed to superpower machine learning. Then there are a couple of other main ideas. One is the idea of unsupervised learning, which is where you have something that learns, which is I guess what you're alluding to, something that can learn categories of things on its own. It doesn't need to be told that that's a cat. It just needs to be shown lots of cats, and then it kind of starts to form its own category.
That was brilliant.
Ooh.
I
didn't see that coming. I didn't see that coming. Same, it applies to dogs as well. And the other is reinforcement learning, where you're also not showing something. You're not kind of providing the guiding data. You're just saying whether you did something right or wrong, and then that learning is the system might learn what to do in response to a situation based on just that, positive, negative feedback.
Cool. And there was a few terms that you might like to define that I think are a little bit beyond me.
Okay, so I threw these your way because they're all clustered around my area of interest, and I'll just do this really quickly. Computational creativity is something that we're definitely going to talk a bit about today, and in the academic sphere, it's the tag that's become associated with the process of looking at ways that we can use algorithms to automate any aspect of a creative process. In the broadest possible sense, so that might mean creativity in science or design as well as in visual art or music, but most of the focus is in visual art, music, poetry, so the artistic sphere. And then really all of the others are relatives of this category. So procedural content generation is a mode of, actually kind of increasingly widely used today, a mode of creating content, particularly in video games. So you might know the game Minecraft, or your kids might know the game Minecraft, and the landscapes in Minecraft are generated when you load up the game. So that no one's drawn those out, they're generated by an algorithm. That's a very simple example of procedural content generation. So it's a mild form, you might say, of computational creativity. Generative art is, I'm being really vague and quick here, but it's roughly the same thing in the domain of art. So art practice where you use code to write some procedures that would generate something, and there's an interesting philosophical question there about how the machine then gradually, maybe just in very minute ways, becomes involved in the creative task. And creative AI is kind of, I think of it, there might be disagreements, but a much broader area where it's just anything where you're bringing AI and using it creativity. So that it might involve just hacking a neural network and giving it a lobotomy and seeing what happens. That would be creative AI. So there's this broad range of diversifying activity going on.
Okay, cool. Okay, so everybody must have seen that they have some cards on their chairs. So I thought we'd do something a little bit different tonight. I'm hoping that it's going to work. I haven't done it in this setting yet, but we'll see. So look, each of these questions, I've got sort of 5 questions that I kind of put to the guys tonight. They're huge. Like, to be honest, you just even start with the topic like creativity versus robots, and we could talk about it for days. So what I thought I would do was we would play a game that was kind of like bingo. So once everyone, as soon as we say one of the words on the sheet, if you want to cross it off, and then if anyone gets not bingo but tingo, feel free to stand up, yell out tingo, and that's going to be our signal that we can switch to another question and you can choose. So, how does that sound? Does that sound good, everyone? Yeah?
You have to get every word?
No, I think maybe just like one line, one row. Is that how bingo normally works?
Yeah, I think so.
No, you normally have to get everything? Okay, you normally have to get everything. Okay, we'll see how we go. That's just...
You can choose, diagonal or column or row.
Okay, yeah, all right, well, let's do that. So row, column, diagonal, you get one of those, tingo, and we'll move on. Okay, so the 5 questions that we have today are, so the first one we're talking about, so blockchain gives us a lot of interesting applications, and one of the applications is that it's going to be hopefully a very useful tool in fighting piracy. And the way that it can do that is both by storing information, but also by allowing us to have like really efficient transactions, so like for bots to check that whether a song has been used before, putting markers in movies. There's big music libraries where obviously that can happen already, but also to put like credits of who might have contributed to that artistic endeavour. So what my question with this though is that if blockchain ends piracy, what will happen to all the wonderful uses that we have of like remixing, sampling, homages, all of those kind of things? So that's the first question. The second question is talking about whether AI can create art. And I've got a nice example that I'll share with you guys a bit later in detail, but of a team in the Netherlands that tried to create another Rembrandt using artificial intelligence. And we want to discuss, is that art or is it not art? Okay, third question is, does art need humans? So in a lot of tests, humans have been unable to distinguish between work that is created by humans or that is created by artificial intelligence. So where does that leave us? Will machines get better at creating art than us? Question number 4. And I put this one in because if anyone's been following the news and what's been happening with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, I thought it was an interesting thing to bring up with this panel, which is we're now collecting so much data on how people respond to things, whether it's movies with where people's attention go as they watch it, or how people walk through a museum, or what people like. Is using that data to create art that people will like more manipulation? Does this mean that we won't create good art? What happens to art that could be revolutionary and doesn't fit into this? And then the 5th question is talking about access. So there's obviously, it's never been easier to access art. It's never been easier to create art, but now we're kind of drowning in content. And so some of the solutions that we've had for how to sort through content is by using algorithms to suggest music that we might like, or to suggest movies that we might want to watch. And again, what happens to the artist that might not fit into what that algorithm likes? So, show of hands or show of cards. Who's up for question 1? Who should we start? Okay. One. Okay. What about for question 2? Oh, okay, cool. All right. Question 3. Oh, okay, that's a good one. Question 4. Data manipulation. Okay. And question 5. Access. Oh, I don't know. What do you guys think? It was between 5 and 3. I think it was 3.
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right. So yeah, I just wanted to just kind of throw a couple of points out here first, which was, so obviously we talked about so has everyone heard of the face swapping for deepfake? Yeah? Nicolas Cage's face being put onto every movie character, or lots of movie characters. Look, I just thought that was kind of a nice provocation for this, which is, do we need actors in the future? I mean, if we can put Nicolas Cage on everyone, do we need actors? And if an AI can create sounds that have never been heard of or thought of before, how does that leave musicians? So who wants to pick up the thread?
I'm very happy to.
Go.
So I'll just start with the question, I guess. I'm not sure exactly how to talk to these bits, but I love the way you phrased that question. I mean, it's just nicely provocative, and I think one of the reasons I really think that's a particularly interesting question is because it really frames perspective on what art is in terms of it. So I don't know if people are familiar with the theory of memetics, or Dawkins' idea of the meme, which I'm always talking about, and I'm always putting in the disclaimer, I'm not a huge fan of it. So I'm not here to evangelize about that way of thinking about culture, but I'm extremely interested in cultural evolutionary models. And there's a perspective on art which is to do with we are the vehicles for our genes. We're also the vehicles for these kind of cultural forms that come and go. And that may be functional, that may serve functions in our lives. Certainly we all kind of have an obvious personal connection with artistic experience. But we also, as a community of humans, provide this kind of platform upon which this cultural phenomena occurs. So I like the really big picture of this question, which is that the substrate upon which art exists could be replaced by something completely different. And in the most trivial sense, you can build closed-world computer simulation models of people, of social processes, where you have artistic interaction going on within that closed-world model. That doesn't connect with our lives in any way, but it does provide a kind of thought experiment there. Like if what's going on within that closed world of artificial agents is them exchanging what we might call cultural productions, then there's potentially a continuity between what we're doing and that crazy world. So I think, an important point there is that cultural production is one of the useful ways to think more broadly about art. Anything that we do that we create not for an immediate physical benefit, getting food or building shelter, but anything that is involved in our kind of communicative relationships with others and our cultural relationships with others. So that stuff can live on. That's an extremely philosophical take on the whole thing. But I think that's what
philosophy. It is.
I think that's what you need to answer the question, because if I give a more practical answer, it's that nothing's going to change anytime soon. Don't worry, because
that's how I feel.
Right, where the AI is at the moment is mind-boggling and fantastic, but it's still like the tip of the iceberg towards what we do. And one of the huge problems is it's not emotionally grounded in the way that we are, and that's kind of connected to what I'm talking about. So you can fake and model and simulate those emotions in black boxes, but connecting those systems to human life is hugely challenging.
So it's going to be more difficult for AI to create art that touches us emotionally because it doesn't have that emotional grounding that we do.
I think that's way, way off. But big caveat there is that, and this touches on the manipulation question that you've got up there as well. like how can you influence people, and that, because predictive technologies are so good, are getting extremely good, like the ability to model a human's reaction, or to model the content of a musical style or an artistic style. Those things are getting extremely good. So the systems may not be good simulations of people, and so they may not be a suitable substrate for any kind of art process to exist in its own right. They can be used by people very effectively.
Yeah. So Brendan, what about sounds that have never been heard before, never been created before? Does that pose an interesting question for a sound designer?
Yes, in that using it to create stuff is interesting, but that's not necessarily, that's not the art part. You know, that to me is an aesthetic part. That's just something to be used to create, to push an idea. It's not the idea itself. You know, I come to it from the perspective of the art is the conceptual idea at the top, and I use generative music in installations and all sorts of things. And but that isn't anything without the idea that comes before it. So, you know, from the conversations point of view, it's cool. It's just another tool to use. You know.
Do you think that, like, given the sort of exponential, like how clever, I guess, AI has got, do you think we'll get to a point where pop songs or whatever will end up liking what computers can create more than what we can create?
I don't know. I think, yeah, I'm not sure. I've listened to a lot of the experiments along, you know, that have been done where music has been generated, and there's some really interesting stuff, but it's still being fed a lot of aesthetic decisions by a composer originally. You know, it's not doing anything from the ground up. It's getting it's having a lot of decisions made for it by other people first, and so it's very rudimentary what's going on. So I'm not sure, you know, where perhaps the question of consciousness comes into it. You know, do we have to wait for is there something about the creation of art that's to do with the fact that we are conscious? And for AI to perhaps be involved in doing something that's meaningful to us, or that we respond to, perhaps maybe the question is, does the AI need to get to a position of having its own consciousness in order to do that? Which, again, is... if it ever happens, it's a long
fast.
That's kind of the conversation.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And what about, Mark, with like big data? Like, given that we have so much data on what people like, does that change the game at all?
Well, I think to make it a little bit more philosophical, I think this is a very, very philosophical question, because you can start all the way at the beginning, because at the moment we don't have AI that can create art by itself, because someone, a human, needs to create that algorithm, that AI first. So we're not that far yet that AI can create AI, you know, to the advanced level. That's one part of the question. And then the other part of the question is, if you talk about big data and what Ollie just mentioned about the predictive possibilities that we can have, that we can predict what humans like, predict what kind of emotions some kind of art will evoke, you know, that will create. If an AI creates art based on the prediction of what kind of emotions will be created, is it an art or is it fake? I don't know. You know?
And even moving on from that, there's this in the world of, say, film music, where you know, that's part of what the business that I'm involved in does, and just music and television in general. You're often asked to write things to elicit a direct emotional response, and you know, as a musician and a composer, we've got a toolbox of things that allow us to do that. I think it's interesting from an AI if we turn it around, not necessarily it knowing that same toolbox, but can it judge that stuff? You know, can we program an AI to go, a composer's written something, and I totally see it in advertising happening, and I know some of the stuff that Google does. They've got a box that looks at ads before they put them on air to judge if it's going to perhaps work with an audience or not. But you know, as a musician, it could be it's an interesting provocation to have an AI that sits there and actually sort of judges your work based on the sets of rules that we know.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, if you take it a step further, then you have AI judging whether or not you as an artist will become successful.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will start to create towards AI.
And no one's got Tingo yet, so maybe this kind of nicely segues into the question of, if we end up in this sea of content and algorithms are determining what we see, what does that mean? Mark, do you think we're going to be, that we will be able to still find those gems if we're drowning in content?
I think so. I think the problem that we have at the moment, I have a massive problem with Facebook and with all the other social media networks, with LinkedIn, and everything. And the reason being is that I am not in control whatsoever. And the Facebook or the LinkedIn or the whatever social media network algorithm determines for me what I am about to see. Google determines for me what I am about to see if I do a search result. I can't even change my location anymore because Google thinks I want to see, if I'm in Sydney, I want to see local results. Maybe I want to see Dutch, maybe I want to see Dutch results, and I can't change that. I think that's a problem. So if we move into too much into that direction, we lose control, and you can even say, do we lose our self-determination, and do we lose our free will even? If we're always pushed into this corner where we already, if I read books on this topic, so I only find books in that topic, or maybe I want to find something else. So I think it's up to us, to the developers and to companies, to prevent that from happening, and always allow just different things to come in and not focus purely on the algorithmic.
So is it possible, Ollie, to program in serendipity or?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's so many things you can do to counteract that effect. But I'd just offer a slightly different perspective, which is that there's also a continuity to what has always existed. So going into a record store with genre, as a musician, I've always battled with genre. Like, you're always asked what your genre is. It's like the most maddening thing. And that's a kind of version of the thing you're talking about, is who decides that there are these tags and you go into them. And one of the processes that clearly underlies that is a form of clustering where things get sorted into clusters. And I think we do that really naturally. That's not just algorithms that do that. And there's a fascinating experiment that was done where about 10 years ago, it was this online experiment. They got people to listen to music online and rank the music. And there were two versions of the study. One where you just rank the music, and the other way you rank the music, but you got to see what other people's rankings were before you did it. And you might guess what the outcome of this is. I'm sure people are thinking. The outcome was this very strong positive feedback effect. So you kind of, and it might just be that you're just steered towards listening to the tracks that are more highly ranked, but that in itself is enough to, it's called a winner takes all effect, right? So a whole load of stuff that's quite good just gets completely forgotten about, and a couple of things that are maybe just a tiny bit better to start with suddenly get amplified and become hugely successful. That's a natural human process, whether you like it or not. It happens in the arts, it happens all over the place. But algorithms can really supercharge that. They can just do the same thing but more, or they can just make it even worse by choosing the crap stuff and amplifying that. Any number of things.
Especially if people are paying, right?
Yeah.
To have their stuff pushed up the algorithm.
There we go.
Yeah. So I do think there's a continuity, but it's up to us, like you say, it's up to us to choose, ideally, to design the world that we want, and do we want that world to be extremely spiky with certain individuals getting recognised and thousands of others not, or do we want there to be a more even mix?
Egalitarian mix. Yeah. And also to remember that there's the offline world, and there's still social construct. There's still that stuff that goes on, and people still do discover things outside of those networks. They're just another form of network. It's just a you and me network talking to each other.
That's right.
And getting excited about something. And we've still got the ability to program things that do things in a similar way to that. It's just no one's figured out a great way of monetizing it yet.
But it's also, I think something that we should, as consumers, should demand from the big companies that build all these algorithms. Because I think in the end, we as consumers want to remain in control. And at the moment, for a lot of these online world that you are in, you're not in control, period. None. And I think that's a big problem.
Do you think we'll ever get to a point where we'll be able to control the algorithms that feed us stuff?
I think so. I think if you are, I think you should put the consumer in control. So, for example, you could develop like 5 different algorithms for your consumers, for your customers, and then the customer can determine the mix of those algorithms.
Which kind of is happening on Spotify. You know, you can train it somewhat.
Yeah, but not very much.
No, it's not great, but it's leaning in that direction.
Spotify is scaring me at the moment because the recommendation is so good. I've started to rely on it, and that's terrible, but good.
Yeah.
Are they? This is my unfamiliarity with it. I'm aware of how Pandora used to do it. Is Spotify completely algorithmic? Does anyone know?
I don't actually know, but
I'd just be really interested if it's got that good.
I don't know, but when you say algorithmic, that can mean a number of things, and one of them is collaborative filtering. Basically, it all comes down to what your social network or what people who like this, like that, listen to. So there's
huge amounts of data that show you'll probably like this. So that actually comes back to your point earlier.
Anyone? Have we got any tingos? Is anyone close? No. No. Oh gosh. Someone needs to mention blockchain. Oh, we've had it. Oh my gosh. What's on? Okay. What question do we want to go?
I just want to go back to the third question, to this question, the number 3. Because we usually briefly touch over it. I think it's an interesting component to mention. That's deepfakes, because we're talking about sort of philosophical aspect of AI, and I think that's good, and also about the potential it has. But I also think it's important to talk about the dangers of AI, because I'm a big fan of AI, but I'm also very cautious. I think we should be very careful what we're trying to develop, and I think deepfakes is very, very scary. Just to give you an example, what's possible with deepfakes, what they have already done is in porn, they have already put someone's other face on the actors. Well, that's in itself can be relatively harmless. It's not, but it goes a lot further, because now they can also mimic audio and they can mimic faces. So what they can do is they can have us talk and then mimic different audio onto what we're saying and mimic different faces onto us. And all of a sudden there are 2 people sitting here talking completely something different that none of us ever said. And all of a sudden that is then the reality. And to showcase the dangers with that is what happened with Trump, that he already said that his tapes where he talked about grabbing the woman, etc., that he already said, well, maybe someone tampered with the tape. I didn't say that. And I think that is really scary.
So the technology doesn't actually need to work for someone to exploit it.
But that's an interesting thing, because I agree with you. I'm completely frightened by this. And I think that the thing that's so frightening is that we have kind of trust and faith in video in a way that we've lost in images, because everyone knows that Photoshop, that images are easily manipulated, but we've kind of had a bit more trust in video. But now this is broken, and at the end, you could end up having a completely different reality to someone because you're seeing a different video. So how do we determine what is true?
We need someone cleverer than the people making the deepfakes to have something that shows that it's a deepfake.
Yeah, probably. But I think we'll be able to determine that.
Yeah, in the same way it does when you're on Reddit and you're looking at a JPEG and you go, oh, that's been chopped. So
I'm sure we will find ways, but it's something that I want to point out, because that goes a lot further, of course. Because and that's in my research, I'm looking at responsible AI. How can we create AI that behaves the way we want it to behave? And how can we not, for example, the Tay example. Is anyone familiar with the Tay example? Tay was a Twitter bot developed by Microsoft 2 years ago. And they launched the Twitter bot, and it was unsupervised learning, because it learned from the input that people gave. And within an hour or so, it was a full-on racist, starting to praise Hitler and deny the Holocaust. Now, I think we laugh about it now, but it's very dangerous. And of course, in this case, nobody got hurt. Maybe someone got insulted, which is already bad enough. But in the future, this might happen that people get killed because of it. So.
And we haven't even talked about the bias that can be in AI data sets.
Oh.
But I would like to maybe go back to question 2, because I think this is kind of an interesting one when we're talking about who owns what. So I just wanted to show you guys this example. This kind of freaks me out a little bit. So this team tried to create another Rembrandt. And what they did was they analysed 346 Rembrandt paintings using millions of different data points from like brushstrokes to what was the subject and how it was composed. And I guess my question is this art? And if so, who owns the art? Who wants to take this one?
I've written about this, but I haven't reminded myself exactly what techniques they use. But I think it's style transfer, which is a technique whereby if you think of the composition of the painting as two layers, one is the content and the other is the style, which is a very crude breakdown, but basically the brush strokes and the colouring and so on might be considered the style, and that guy there is the content. There's this technique which is being proven to be incredibly successful, and I put it under the creative AI category because it doesn't really do anything like what an artist does in terms of thinking about the meaning or the purpose of the work or anything like that. It just applies the style to an image. And there's actually a really great video which I was hoping to have queued up. I don't, but maybe I can send some links later. There's this fantastic video of the latest work in style transfer, and it's more of a Turner-esque style, kind of, this kind of rough sea landscapes. And what they do is they do this with animations. So they're in front of a camera, they're just arranging these table objects, like a cloth makes the sea with the horizon, and they just get a mobile phone charger and plonk it on top, and that makes a rock, kind of rocky outcrop. And next to that, you can see what the style transfer is doing, and it's basically creating this incredible animation, which is in the style of Turner, kind of doing rolling seas and beautiful brushstrokes and so on. So that just happens to be an area where people have been really having great success recently. I don't know specifically about the details of this, but I think it's along those lines. And so when you start to break that down, you can begin to see that as like, oh, okay, really, in one sense, it's just an Adobe effect, right? We're all used to running these automatic filters, and this is now where we're at. You can slap that filter on. And of course, the minute you do that, and the same with Instagram filters and all this other sort of stuff you can do, then I guess the normal reaction, I think, is just to say the goalposts have shifted of what creative practice is, as with the introduction of photography and so on. It rearranges the configuration of what you're doing, what tools you have available, how powerful they are, and so on. But it doesn't fundamentally change artistic creativity in this case. But I think there are some things that are very close to that do start to trip over into a fundamentally different way.
But do you then say that the developer who wrote the algorithm is the artist?
I would pitch in and say it comes back to the conceptual idea. So if that person had that conceptual idea, sure. But if it was someone else coming to a program, and I've gone to programmers asking them to do stuff for me, now they're not creating the artwork, they're helping me create the artwork, but the artistic intent, the idea, that's where it lies. And of course we can have a greater conversation about, well, as an artist, I think you're providing something, some ideas as the programmer towards that's affecting my ideas. And of course that then becomes a collaborative thing, and you can divvy up ownership however, as a group you decide to, and perhaps we just need a really good smart contract for it. But, if I think the question becomes simpler perhaps, and maybe I just need it to be simpler to cope with it, by thinking about it being who has the initial conceptual idea.
I think you're right, but I would go further and say that it's really inappropriate to think of this kind of massive team project in terms of who's the artist. It's a collaborative, very large-scale cultural production of some form, but it doesn't have just because it looks like the stuff that Rembrandt produced, it doesn't follow a necessary parallel with Rembrandt the artist versus his canvas. This is a completely different mode of cultural production. So you've just got to step away from that framing of the question. Of course, there's I don't know, an artistic director or a concept developer, experience designer,
or a curator who puts that next to a real one and provokes an audience to to feel something about having those two next to each other. That then becomes an interesting...
So what if we change the example to it being a robot or an algorithm that is self-learning and creates a unique piece of work? Who then owns that work?
Okay, you're pointing to a couple of key categories. I think you've got them listed here. But one is the developer, the other is the developer of the concept, the other is the machine itself, and the other, quite important, I think probably one of the most relevant for the kind of immediate discussion, is the people whose data the system was trained on, if it was trained on data, because you can have systems that aren't machine learning based. So I should have said that earlier. There are types of AI that are not anything to do with learning, but generally the large majority of the techniques are based on a massive data set. And one of the things that people taking this into the commercial sphere are dealing with now is the fact that those systems will plagiarize, because that's kind of what they're designed to do. They're designed to analyze all this data and then spit out something that's like it. Well, one of the best ways to do that is just to copy and paste. So you actually have to be quite careful about that. And you have to add into your algorithms a kind of anti-plagiarism additional algorithm, otherwise you're going to get in big trouble. So the source of the data, and I don't know where we're at with this in terms of like case law or anything, but the source of the data would be pretty significant.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how relevant this is, but on a really simplistic term, I did a little piece for a lobby in a building in New York, which was it was a soundscape, for when people are entering and exiting the building, and I used a bunch of data sources, some really simple, sunrise, sunset in the day, how much energy the building was using, because it was a 7-star rated building, and just the number of people that were in the room. Now, from there's an interesting conceptual thing there where, well, those people, by being in the room, are causing my program to react in a particular way. So they're actually being involved in the creation of the work. And on an ownership level, you could make a very valid argument that they then have a degree of the ownership of that particular piece of music. It's just a provocation. It's not something that needs to be solved.
Yeah. But I think it's the same thing that relates to me very much to the self-driving car discussion, which is if a self-driving car crashes, who caused it? Is it the software developer? Is it the car manufacturer? Is it the driver? And that became very relevant last week when a woman got killed by a self-driving car.
Did everyone hear that? One of Uber's autonomous vehicles killed a pedestrian. First.
So yeah, that's not a very nice first to have, but I think it's the same question, and for the self-driving car to take off, we'll need to solve and answer that question: who causes it? And I think for the and that's my link to the art scene. I think for the art scene, if we value copyright, and I think we should, and we do, then we have to solve this question as well for the arts, because otherwise, what's the point of having an arts scene?
And just quickly, because we're running out of time, do you think, Mark, that blockchain has the potential to help us change how we think of people owning things? Like, does it raise some possibilities, and that attribution can be done to multiple people in different ways?
Of course, the only answer for that is yes, because blockchain will solve everything. But yes, no, it's absolutely true, because the beauty of the blockchain is that you can put everything, you can sort of license every different part, and because everything is immutable, traceable, and verifiable, you can really go back in time and see who added what part, who owns that, what time, for how much, etc. And then if you have 20 people owning a song because of various reasons whatsoever, and someone buys that song, that $1 is instantly split in 20 portions, and everyone gets their own portion.
And this is actually incredibly important in the world of, say, music being put onto ads. And one of the women we work with, she licenses all the time. And it's it's a far more difficult problem to license even a piece of music from 20 years ago or 70 years ago, and trying to work out the provenance of it and trying to make sure the right people are being paid and stuff doesn't happen afterwards. And that's a simple thing compared to some of these issues.
And that's the problem that you see at the moment happening, is that if people use YouTube and they use a part of a song or whatever, and they don't attribute it correctly whatsoever, all of a sudden what Google does, all the royalty or all the advertising revenue, I have to say, that belongs to the video is taken away from that creator of that video and given all to the original owner of that copyright. While that copyright might only be like 2 or 3 seconds. I think that's not really fair. So, and with blockchain, what it enables you, if we have this song made by 20 people, and then I make a video and I use 3 seconds of that video, 3 seconds of that song in my video, then all those 20 people get this very tiny fraction of my revenue. And that is possible with cryptocurrencies. Because you can, a cryptocurrency, which is a digital currency, which can be split up in 100 millionth of a cent. And so all of a sudden, these kind of things become possible. So yes, blockchain will solve this.
Excellent. Look, I'm going to throw it open to questions in just 1 second, but I just wanted to leave you with a little thought, which was we've kind of discussed how technology is changing art, but potentially it's worth having a think about how art is changing technology. And I guess for me, personally, it's kind of these 3 ways. By inspiring and introducing us to technology, I think that it's really interesting to try and sometimes ask ourselves, what came first? Was it a fictional idea, or was this technology already coming and then someone turned it into something? I think that there is an amazing opportunity in art to bring technology to the mainstream, but also to inspire new technologies. I call it playfully abusing, but I've seen some wonderful examples recently. Actually, I just wanted to show you this one quickly. This one on the left. So if you think about big data, and we didn't really talk so much about it tonight, but I think this is kind of a beautiful example of wind patterns across the US where big data has turned into something artistic and really, really beautiful. And lastly, I think that art has this almost a duty, if you like, to ask some really hard questions of some of this technology that we're looking at. There's a work up here called Hagborg's Stranger Visions that I sort of found that, so these are 3D printed faces that are reconstructed off things, people's DNA that they've thrown away. So off a piece of chewing gum, off a cigarette butt. So I think that raises some important questions. And also, I'm not sure if anyone's seen it because it's a Sydney-based artist called Snow who created a door, an anxious door. Have you guys seen this? No?
No, but I've read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
He created this door that reads the news. And using natural language processing and sentiment analysis, if it would reach a certain level of anxiety, it would just shut for like 24 hours and the door would be locked and then it would reset itself again. And so I think these are just wonderful examples of how art can really make us think. And so someone from SAMAG, I'm not sure who it was, put up this beautiful quote on the Facebook page, so I'm stealing it, which is, artists critique technology, celebrate humanity, remind us as a society we belong to and how it can be better. So I'm going to throw up into questions for you guys. We don't have a roving mic, so if anyone wants to either put up their hand or shout it out, I'll repeat it and ask it to the panel. Any questions? And nobody got Tingo. I'm very disappointed. Oh my gosh, we got one!
I got it when you said 3D printing.
3D printing, oh no! We didn't talk about 3D printing. Okay.
Not big data.
You're
Big data, smart contracts and algorithms.
Oh, awesome. Do you have a question?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. No questions.
Maybe I can add something, maybe if someone has some questions afterwards. But,
Okay.
but I think what the interesting thing is about what in the era that we're living at the moment. So in the 70s we got computing, and that was the start of the information age. And before that, like in the 1800s, we had the industrial age. And so we're now approaching the 4th industrial revolution, which sort of, everything is connected with everything and we have data everything. And there is this hypothetical, theoretical, for another age, which is out there, which is called the imagination age. And the imagination age is basically starts when AI has taken over society. And creativity is the #1 source of income for economies. And it's sort of taking a different approach where where you look at more that the society will, and humans instead of AI taking over creativity, humans will always be involved with creativity, and that will become the main source of income for our societies. And I think that's a great example of that. You know, and the way I see it, that we will always be creative, and we'll always come up with new creativity. And maybe AI enables us to become more creative.
So maybe we end up working with AI as opposed to being scared of it or thinking it will solve everything.
So long as it's working for us.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, I was just going to say I agree. I think the creative industry will actually, in fact, create new market space in the creative industries with the introduction of robotics and things like that, because you do need the elements of human beings and creativity. Whereas, jobs, in the next 10, 15 years, according to an organisation says that jobs will be, automated. 40% of our workforce will be automated, but it'll only be, the interactive kind of jobs, and jobs that don't need much mobility or social interaction. Mm-hmm. So, saying this, I think, it'll be work in favour for the creative industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you take away a lot of those jobs, then potentially more people are free to be more creative. So, any other questions? Yeah.
So you talked about deepfakes and how scary that can be, and about the way that Facebook badge and whatever else. In molecular biology, there's regulation in place to stop how we do stem cell research, or at least control it. Is there ever a time you think that this rush that we see toward all this AI will actually be controlled in some sense by regulation?
I'm the least important person here in terms of having an opinion on this one, but I certainly hope so. I think we need to definitely, technology tends to move faster than regulation. Just that's the nature of how it works. But I do think that, and in fact, turning it around, perhaps it's up to artists to provoke some of these questions in the work that we're producing in order to perhaps put some protections in place around this stuff. Yeah.
There's so many areas where potentially we're facing tsunami of change that we need to regulate against, and it's terrifying. I mean, just pick anything like drones that can fly through your window and rob your house, those examples, and then in the world of machines generating art, maybe there's not so much mortal danger, but there is a tie into this world that we've been looking at with the Cambridge Analytica phenomenon, where I tend to think of it as actually there's this kind of potential risk around large-scale cultural manipulation becoming something that it's like the opposite of the blockchain. Actually, it used to be distributed amongst people, and then through kind of culturally enabled machines, it can become channeled and owned by individuals, which is an utterly terrifying prospect, but not one that we're talking much about, and not one that I think is necessarily impending. But yeah, just to go back to your question, regulation is absolutely necessary, and quite scary that's really what we're depending on for stopping some of this change, because it's so slow moving.
Yeah. And it's hard to do.
Yeah. Well,
because what you don't want to do is restrict to a degree where this development stops. It becomes this really difficult balance.
But I think the main problem that we face here is that, yes, let's say in a hypothetical utopia we create regulation for AI. I don't think it will ever happen, because it's there's too much of an arms race going on in AI, because whoever creates the general artificial general intelligence like AI that's as smart as humans will probably rule the world. So. But let's say there is regulation, and we have a United Nations of AI, whatever. Then still you have this lone hacker, on the attic that can develop an AI that can just destroy the entire world. And that sounds really far off, but that is the possibilities, because anyone who has access to the internet has theoretically access to anything that's connected to that. Yes, we need regulation. Maybe we'll get it. Will have much of effect? I doubt it.
And it's important to understand that benign goals can potentially be disastrous as well. So there's There's this well-known example, kind of thought experiment of a benign robot. It's called the paperclip maximizer experiment. And you imagine making this incredibly smart robot whose goal is to make paperclips. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all desperately need paperclips in our lives at reduced cost. But this robot is very smart. It can invent, it can innovate, and it's left to its own devices. And the world becomes destroyed because it sucks up all of the resources in the world and makes a pile of paperclips the size of Mount Everest. And that's a kind of funny example, but it's a serious thought experiment. And it's actually highly relevant to so many situations today, not just in the obvious area of AI, but it's actually what a lot of companies do. They have an objective, they try and maximize that objective, and it's not in the common good. But when you start to supercharge, particularly this feedback process where a system can improve itself and get, actually innovate, then that does become terrifying. And the really important message there is it's still a benign goal. Like you're not trying to destroy the world, it just gets destroyed anyway.
In the process.
So what you're saying is this is all philosophy.
No, I think this might not be a thought experiment one day. It might be a very real experiment.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? Because if not, I will leave it there. And thank you so much, guys, for being part of the conversation.
Please hang around and join us for a drink and a chance to continue the conversation with our panellists. And thank you everyone again.